Yeah. So the emotional aspect of the trial, which has a lot to do with interpreting the evidence in relation to Dimitri as a person, and kind of trying to build intent, or whether there was intent or anything like this. And I'm not a lawyer either, but I think there is an element of that in law, which is if this is the sort of person, it's kind of like if you can build precedents. Like, look, this guy's robbed stores 4 or 5 times. It kind of adds some weight to, well, he's a robber. That's what he is, and so there's some like precedent. And I think there's something about building the character of Dimitri as showing that it would be fitting. It's kind of like the motive. The motive would be there, the intent would be there, and they kind of try to build it. And the way that it's being built is by an interpretation of the evidence, and this is an important part of the whole trial. It's that the evidence that is given is referred to as material evidence, and the material evidence has to be interpreted. Here you have an object or a letter, and what that object or that letter serves as evidence one way or the other, if it can be fit into a story or an interpretation of like purpose and intention and what have you. So, but in and of itself, and this is what Fechikovich, the defense attorney, says about psychology, it's a two-edged stick. No, sticks, two-sided stick, two-edged sword. He doesn't stick with two ends. A stick with two ends. That's I was looking for the right phrase. And what he means by that, I think, is I don't know if this is what I was thinking about. Like, you take a stick and you swing it one way and you hit someone, but the other end of the stick kind of is like hitting you, and you're like it's like a Three Stooges move, And I think it's the case that when you interpret the evidence in one way, it could turn out that it actually is also evidence that can serve a counter interpretation. And this is a phenomenon that is certainly true, although we don't tend to want to admit this, that when you see something occurring, okay, here I am, I see, this is the example I used last class, I'll just use it. I see Dr. Sienkiewicz, and I hit him in the face, and I'm getting really angry and mad at him. What would that mean? The fact that I hit him in the face and that I'm getting angry at him, what would you interpret that to mean? What's the significance of that? What does that mean about my relationship with Dr. Sienkiewicz? I'm certainly harming him in some way. What would it tell you about how I feel about Dr. Sienkiewicz, how I think about Dr. Sienkiewicz, my relationship? Would that be could you judge my relationship based on those actions?
It would be a little rocky at the moment.
It's kind of rocky at the moment, to say the least. Yeah. Initial impressions perhaps would be like, they must not be friends anymore, especially if it wasn't like a friendly punch, but like a real punch, right? And it wasn't just like friendly joking words, but like actually like mean words. You would sort of take it as Jaeger doesn't like Sienkiewicz anymore, and now that's a reasonable interpretation, but you can figure out these situations for yourself and try to translate this. But there are times when people that I really love and I love the most, you can talk to my wife about this and you'll get millions of examples of this. People that I love the most, I'm often like the cruelest towards. And often I'm cruel and mean towards them, and I say nasty things towards them not because I don't love them, but it's because I kind of love them in a weird, twisted type of way. It's like, I don't want them out of my life. I just want them to, and then you fill in the blank, right? And it's kind of this over, zealous affection for someone that can actually make me really angry at them. It's a possibility. It maybe not that extreme. Here's a real world instance that happens on playgrounds across America. Get your average 5th grade, 6th grade boy. You might have to get younger than that. Probably getting like 4th and 5th grade. And there's this girl, and she's walking by the slide. The boy's in him, and he spits on her. And if you saw that, you'd be like, "Oh man, he must hate that girl. He spit on her hair, and like he's calling her names. Why is he doing this? He must hate her. Does he hate her? No, just the opposite. She's the one person on the playground that he loves. Yeah? You know what I'm talking about? And why does he do that? All right, if you're interpreting his actions, you would think this is clearly what he thinks. There's a whole host of reasons why spitting on someone when you're in 5th grade is a form of affection, like tripping them, taking away their backpack and hiding it and doing all these sorts of like nasty things. Why is that a form of affection? How does that express love? It's mixed up with a whole host of things, a sense of insecurity and not wanting people to think that you like this person, but you still want to show them attention, but so you don't want them to show attention that is like attention. You want to show them attention that's like, oh, they don't like you, but they still are showing you attention. Anyway, it's mixed up in a whole host of like, early childhood psychology. But the fact of the matter is, if you looked at the material evidence in the principal's office, you spit at the girl, you must hate her. Is that a good interpretation of the material evidence? The spit in the hair. It's like little Jane comes and says, like, look. They're like, oh, clearly they're a malicious, guilty person who hates it. Now, maybe they did spit, but the meaning of that action is not something that can be interpreted right from the spit. You know what I mean? Is everyone following? Okay, this is why I think this is why you get these two opposing interpretations of the material evidence. And it's so difficult because the material evidence, all the evidence that's gathered, is pointing almost beyond any doubt, other than the fact that he didn't do it, that Dimitri committed the murder. Like, this is what's so puzzling about the situation. Dimitri is like so perfectly situated to be proven guilty of the murder because of all of his actions, everything he said, everything he wrote, and yet he didn't do it. And so it's kind of as if his whole life was consisted of this material evidence, which you could think of as, this is getting all Platonic up in here, externals, which are the manifestation or the revelation of some sort of internal reality. And it's as if his whole life he really was like presenting himself as a man who's going to murder his father, and he kind of was like hoping and dreaming for that. But this is what's fascinating about human life, is there can be a deciding moment that makes us realize, wait a second, all along what I was really looking for and hoping for and striving for wasn't really the murder of my father, but it was this other thing. And this can happen, this one moment which kind of reinterprets everything that's happened in your life. Sometimes this is called a conversion moment. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a religious conversion, although that's a classic example. But it's like a moment where a lot of what has happened in your life changes its significance, its meaning. All these nasty things happened to you as a kid. And you used to think the meaning of it was this. And then at a certain point, you realize, wait a second, because of this one particular event, the meaning and the significance of all of that slightly changes. Does that kind of make make a little sense? Anyway, this is, let me just, so when Dimitri is arrested and he's in prison and he's talking about his hymn, remember, the I exist, though I'm on the rack, I exist, and all that. He's just so thankful for his very existence, which we're going to come back to here today. Right after that, he says this, which I think is a fascinating way to understand Dimitri's interior life. I think part of what's at stake is what's going on in Dimitri internally. Is he a murderer or is he not? And I think Dimitri's willing to admit that he's a murderer because everything he was doing was kind of communicating that, leading up to that. But here's where he says, I can be proven guilty, or I will accept the consequences for being a murderer, even though I didn't murder my father. And here's, I think, what the way he understands a lot of his life now. This is on page 592 of this edition. He says, "You see, before I didn't have any of these doubts, but they were all hiding in me. Maybe I was drinking and fighting and raging just because unknown ideas were storming inside me." So it's kind of like people do things largely because they're running from something that they don't want to really know. This is a common phenomenon, which is kind of crazy. And so it's not so much like that he was just this completely reckless person. It was more like he was a guy that was afraid. He was sort of scared of who he was. I was fighting to quell them within me, to tame ideas, to tame them, to subdue them. And he kind of goes on. But I think the idea is the material evidence can be interpreted to suggest one kind of internal reality of Dimitri or another internal reality of Dimitri, which kind of suggests, I think what Dostoevsky's saying, is that there is an insufficiency or an indeterminacy of the meaning of physical events. Like you look at a physical event and you say, what's the meaning of that? And it's hard to answer that question just by an appeal to the physical events, because those alone don't determine it. It's like, does the spitting mean that he hates the girl, or is that he actually has a great crush on her? That cannot be determined by just looking at the physical events alone, right? Because humans are so strange. We can act in a way that oddly is an attempt to communicate we don't have a crush on them, we hate them, and so that's why we do the things we do, simply because we want to hide the fact that that's really what our internal life is. And this can happen even at kind of a quasi-subconscious level. Okay, so that's why I think it's such a complicated situation at this trial, because they're trying to judge Dimitri based on the material evidence, the externals, but you can't sufficiently judge anyone based on the externals. So, but you sort of have to. Is I think part of what's at stake. Okay. So it's oddly Alyosha and Grushenka and Ivan who kind of really understand who Dimitri is. But they don't have any. They can't give any evidence to say, look, he's innocent. All Alyosha can say is, if you look at his face, I know he's innocent by just looking at his face, and you're like, that's not going to do it. All right, because you look at his face and you think he's just lying and deceiving, and that's what the face of a poser would look like. Okay, so the thing is you can't be determined by facts, and this is ultimately what the Bernards, referenced over and over again, think you can sufficiently answer a question about what happened, what someone's intentions are, someone's motives are, by just looking at externals. And the more clearly you see the externals, the more clearly you can uncover the internals from them. And that's a Bernardian assumption. Okay. That's why I think you're kind of torn, or at least I'm torn when I read this. It's like, if I were in their shoes, I would probably prove Dimitri guilty. I mean, like, seriously, like, you look at all the evidence and you're like, the guy looks completely guilty. Yeah, and maybe I'm alone in that. The only reason I sort of don't think he's guilty is because I read the little jazz about Smerdyakov saying he did it. But even then, sometimes I read it and I kind of think maybe Smerdyakov was just putting Ivan on to completely like mess with him, but I don't think that's actually the case. But you kind of think like Dimitri was so set up to do this. And the only way he would not do it is if you kind of knew deep down what it was like to be a Karamazov and realized everything was going in this way, and then all of a sudden you basically did something completely radical, which was you didn't act on everything that was like pointing in one direction. Here he is, he's hanging out the window, his nasty Adam's apple is hanging down, you got the pestle, the anger, you're wondering where Grushenka is, and you feel all the tensions, and then you're kind of thinking the only natural conclusion to this would be to smack the old man in the head with the pestle, right? But only a Karamazov can recognize the fact that like they can turn away from that. They can just abandon it all completely, like irrationally in a way. Okay, and that's why I think those three characters realize, no, he could have done that. He really could have.
Okay, so going on to that point, so the people who were on, I'm forgetting the official word, but the trial, the ones who
The jury.
The jury
Yeah.
of him being guilty were mostly made of peasants.
Yes.
And you would think that peasants who are lowly would be able to recognize being a Karamazov.
Yeah.
They too
Yeah.
suffer from this poverty, but then yet they still prove him guilty.
Yes.
That's what bothered me.
Yeah. So here's okay, let's just jump right into the thick of the thick. Okay, this is heels up. This is Karamazov heels up. I think what you have here in this whole story, which sort of has come to an end. There's more in the epilogue, which we're going to get to. But just the book as a whole, so to speak, has come to an end. And it is a really great ethics book for this reason, because it is about a person, a bunch of people, who are put into, without any responsibility on their part, into a complete crappy world. A world that's like the Karamazovs. It's like, I have to have him for a dad? Like, these are my brothers? Like, this is where I'm living? And so it's kind of like you're thrown into this this world which is steeped in injustice. And here is Dimitri, who basically, I kind of believe this is the case, that he does have a claim to the money that Fyodor has. At least Dimitri sincerely thinks he does, right? That the money that Fyodor has is actually his. It was his mother's money that was supposed to go to him, but the dad kept it, which is why Dimitri's like, it's really mine. And he's like, look, that's my inheritance. That really is my inheritance. And you're using my inheritance to take away my woman. It's like, this is like doubly messed up, doubly unjust. And so in one sense, Dimitri is this guy who is thrown into this situation, and you're like, man, it sucks to be Dimitri. Look at that. And he spends a lot of his life trying to fight the injustice of Fyodor, trying to like get his hands on his actual rightful inheritance, almost to the point of even killing his father for what actually belongs to him, in one sense, out of justice's sake, in the name of justice, killing Fyodor for it. Right. So he has on the one hand, he can. We'll just put injustice in the middle. Karamazov. All right. It's they kind of go hand in hand in one way. And I think the thing is he can rebel against his father. He can rebel against him being a Karamazov, living, being the son of this guy, and basically just take it all, cut all ties with his father. And I think this is a type of rebellion. It's kind of to fight the injustice that he is in, is one option he can do. And I think this is ultimately like what Smerdyakov is trying to do, is he over and over and over again he's explained or described as not having any gratitude for his upbringing, specifically for his mom. He despises her, basically despises everything having to do with his own childhood and his own upbringing, because he thinks it's so unjust to have been born the son of this stinking Lisaveta, as he puts it. And so he is trying to make good, so to speak, on his own in response to this injustice. And the alternative would be to accept or endure the injustice. Don't. This is I think why Alyosha is kind of the hero of the novel, and why his action is kind of it's like an onion. He's like pulling up all these people by this onion, and that onion I think is just the fact that he accepted that Fyodor was his father. He didn't rebel against him. And even Ivan hates his father. The only person that doesn't hate his father, who deserves to be hated. This is the thing about Fyodor. He deserves to be hated. Yeah, I think he deserves to be. I mean, he like. We could go through all the little shenanigans that he went through, but I mean, he's a completely despicable person, and yet nevertheless, Alyosha just accepts that he is his father, and it's like, honor your father, not simply because they've proven themselves worthy of your honor, but even when they don't prove themselves worthy of your honor, you accept it. And we're going to come back to the peasants here in a bit, but we're taking the long way around. This is the scenic route, and the figure central in the book, Zosima. Zosima's story, his life, he talks about Job was such an important figure, and Job comes up a couple times, and I think the thing that Dimitri, what Dimitri does is he becomes kind of like this. He's struggling to be a Job figure or not. He's basically like struggling to accept the injustice of his father. Now, think about Job. So let's real quick. Let's jump to Job. And this isn't so much about like a biblical commentary. This is more just kind of about this story, right? So I don't want to comment too much, but just focus on the story itself. So here you have this character who everything was going well, everything was like perfect, and then he loves God. He's not like a rambler and a gambler. Maybe his sons are, but he himself is just, right. He's doing what he should be doing. And then what happens is along comes the devil and says, "Hey God, your little Job is only able to love you because you do good things to him. because you give him cookies and you give him sunshine. If you stop giving him cookies and sunshine, quicker than you could say, I don't know what God would say, but quicker than you could say anything, Job would turn his back on you, right? Because he only respects you and loves you and honors you because you've proven yourself to be a good father. But what if it were the case that you allowed bad things to happen to him? He wouldn't love you anymore. And God says, well, let's see. And then this is where a lot of people find this sort of appalling. And they might kind of think, wait, God, you can't do this to Job. Job's a good guy. You can't let this devil let all these bad things or make all these bad things happen to him. You got to like come in and like smack the devil around and say like, get the heck out of Dodge. But God doesn't. God says, go ahead, do all these unjust things to God. Or no, do all these unjust things to Job. Which is a very strange thing for God to do to Job. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would a good, loving father do this to his son? Now, he doesn't do it directly, but he like even lets it happen in the story. And why does he do it? You could put it in terms of because he's testing Job, but I don't. The testing aspect, the connotation is probably not exactly right. It might be more like because he's giving Job the opportunity to express, manifest, demonstrate, enact would be a better way to put it, to enact his love for the Father, for God, in a way that I like to call a Karamazovian way, because it's a way that comes through complete darkness. It's like Job does not love God because God gives him a lot of crops, because God takes the crops away. And Job doesn't love God because God gives him a lot of kids and a good spouse, because God takes those away, or the devil takes them away and God lets them. Those details we can just look over for the time being. The idea is God lets all these things be taken away from, he like gives his stamp of approval on all these things, right, to be taken from Job. And it's a way, I think, of showing, look, Job is not going to fight the injustice of the devil or the injustice that he's put in. Job is he's not going to rebel against this whole order. He's going to take that as an opportunity. It sounds stupid to say this, an opportunity. He's going to take that as a provocation, to be provoked to a really deep, mysterious sense of love that he would not be able to have were those things not to be taken from him. Does that make sense? This is what I mean. It's like when you have a really wonderful day and it's sunny and the birds are out and everything's really perfect, it's like, yeah, man, God is good. I love this world. I love living. And then all of a sudden, something really tragic, super tragic happens. Something very painful, either for yourself, for someone in your family. And this is, I'm talking like life-changing, sort of painful. I was talking to my father-in-law over break. Just run a real quick story that kind of about some of this stuff, and ultimately about kind of the pain and the suffering and the sense of like forgiveness that has to come from an experience of pain and suffering, because otherwise it's the real depth of what forgiveness means. You can't plumb those depths unless like you get down to the really deep of the human soul. And so my father-in-law mentioned this story, which reminded me of a story that you mentioned earlier, sister, but he knew this family in Minnesota. I think it was in Minnesota somewhere. Very tragic story, but it culminates in something incredibly beautiful. But this woman, she's now, I don't know, probably 40 or so. But when she was younger and she was learning to drive, she accidentally ran over her mother and killed her. And the way that that family responded to that, as you would sort of imagine, is how can we look at our daughter the same way, or our sister, or right, for the father, and so she would describe how my father-in-law was telling me this, how they were saying, how could we like sit down at Christmas dinner 10 years down the road and not feel like this person's to be blamed for why mom's not here, right? And not let that just completely be destructive. I don't know how that could happen besides something like a miracle. But what does happen is that is an occasion, and this is what I mean by, I don't want to call it a test, but it's an occasion, in one sense, oddly, a sort of gift, to really touch the real depth of what like is at work in the drama of forgiveness. It's like when someone just says to you something nasty like, your shoes look ugly and they don't match your shirt. And then they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, I'm sorry. You kind of get a little sense of what forgiveness is. Like, yeah, okay, they had to humble themselves a little bit. But to like forgive someone, your own sibling, for like killing your mother, like how do you do that? And it requires almost like every like fiber of your being. Your whole world has to change. You have to look at people differently because of that. It's an opportunity that you would never be able to know forgiveness in that way were that not to be the case. But obviously, because it gets deeper and darker and uglier and more painful, the tendency to want to rebel against that increases. And what happens is this woman ended up becoming a nun. She's in a, I don't know if she's in a cloister, but she incredible family dynamic that developed because of this event. Really, she's spoken openly about this story of hers. But yeah.
How do you know when to fight the injustice versus accept it?
Well, I think this is like what Dimitri's sort of, he's trying to prove his innocence in at least the material sense, but he's not doing it at the expense of like turning his back on, well, this is what he's worried about. This is why he says, like, please acquit me, please let me off the hook, because I don't know if I can endure this. Meaning, like, he might, and actually he even says, rebel. I might rebel against my God. Right. So he's trying to prove his innocence because, in one sense, he's not sure he can accept that cross. It's like everyone prays that they don't undergo some horrible, painful thing because we're not sure we're strong enough to accept that cross. But it's kind of like, but once it's been given to you, at a certain point, it's probably like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, who like doesn't want to drink from the cup, and he says, if it passes, let it pass, but not at the expense of saying, I am not going to drink from that, period. At a certain point, it becomes just a matter of acceptance, like, I will accept this injustice, I will accept the unjust death, I will endure this, I won't fight it anymore. I won't run from it. He runs from people trying to kill him throughout the Gospels over and over and over again. But at a certain point, he says, no, I'm not going to run from it. I'm actually going to accept it. And it's not, he doesn't do a great act of justice. This is what's sort of weird. He doesn't do a great act of justice in the standard sense, because he completely just accepts the unjust treatment. He lets them treat him unjustly, which doesn't, it's kind of like, wait, that's not how it should go. The score should be settled. Everything should sort of square out. It's almost as if by accepting that, you completely lose. Dimitri is proven guilty, and it's like, but I'm innocent of this. And I think at a certain point, he just has to say, and this is what he's still struggling with at the very end of the book, he just has to say, I know I'm innocent, but I still have to accept that I was proven guilty. I know I don't deserve to be thrown into the Karamazov family, but I am, and so I just have to accept that. It's a type of resistance that doesn't at the same time lose sight of there's a higher, like, why doesn't Job say, wait a second, God, when have I ever offended you? When have I, violated any of your commands? Why are you letting this happen to me? You're the one that's being unjust now. And that's a very common thing for our tendency, although we don't put it that explicitly, a tendency that people have towards what we would call innocent suffering. Like, I don't deserve this. And so the blame is kind of thrown back on God. But this is why Job, and ultimately I think Dimitri, are fascinating characters, is because they recognize that there's a higher justice at work that can even take and accept this, so that this doesn't, the goal isn't that the scores be settled and I get my inheritance, but it actually becomes the case that this route here becomes a way of loving. It's like, this is what Fechikovich, the defense attorney, is trying to say. Look, Dimitri shouldn't be proven innocent of parricide, killing his father, because Fyodor wasn't a father at all. I mean, if you look at Fyodor, you realize, like, the guy forgot his children. He was no father in any sense of the word. At least that's what Fechikovich says. Other than the fact that he just, like, contributed half of the chromosomes that gave rise to the kids. Other than that, nothing like a father. So why should they honor him? And so if he's not a father, there's really no parricide. And if you look at Fyodor, you kind of think, yeah, he deserves murder. And that's kind of a lot of people's feelings. Maybe I don't know how many people felt like Fyodor deserves to die. This is something maybe C.S. Lewis talks about Gollum. Not C.S. Lewis. Tolkien talks about Gollum. He deserves to die, but does he really deserve to die? Does Fyodor really deserve to be killed by his sons? Even though he's completely unjust and completely gives them every reason to rebel, such that in justice it would sort of seem right that Dimitri goes and steals the inheritance. It's kind of almost like injustice, although not quite that extreme, that he could go and kill Fyodor. But I think the idea is, but that order of justice is not the order of justice that generates happiness, right? Smerdyakov basically tried to take what was owed him, and he realized he can't build a life off of that, right? Trying to rebel and build a own order of justice where everything works out is not a life that one can live on. And so I think this is what Dostoevsky's trying to say, is the only possible happiness that can be had through living in an unjust world, being born into the family you've been born into, which is the human family, the Karamazov family, is one that can only be, you can only find happiness through it in an acceptance of the injustice. It's basically like you're born into being sent to Siberia, right? And you're almost like born in sin. This is Psalm 51. It's conceived in sin. My mother, something like that. It's I think it's Psalm 51 or 50, one of them. Does that kind of make sense? So the idea is not that you just throw your hands up and you just don't care about anything, but what I think this ultimately is an awareness that this is really about that. This is, I think, is what Job can do, is that naked I was born and naked I'll return, blessed be the name of the Lord, or something like that. And so it's like everything that's happening to him doesn't undo this higher form of justice, which is, in one sense, he doesn't even deserve to exist in the first place. He doesn't even have a claim for existence in the first place, which gets us back to Dimitri. The thing that gives Dimitri so much joy is, and he says it about 15, 20 times, that he exists. It's his very existence which proves this this higher form of justice, right? And so I think there's a parallel between Job and Dimitri in that way as well. That it's in the mere existence. God doesn't need to prove his goodness for you, in order for you to honor him, because your very existence, like, is the manifestation of his goodness. Right? Does that make sense? So he doesn't have to do anything in it, like, secondarily, because by the very fact that you exist, that is like this manifestation of God's goodness, and therefore of something which goes beyond justice. Because you don't even have a claim to your own existence. You don't even have a right, like a God, you owe me existence. It's like no one deserves from like the foundations of the world to exist. And I think that's what Job, all this stuff is taken from Job. And so it's like a way of returning to that original gift, which was not something that he has this claim to. I don't know. Is that any questions, thoughts, comments about any of this?
Not really a question, just kind of a comment. Do you think that kind of has something to do with, it's page 744 in my edition, which I think is the same.
Okay.
When the defense attorney says, like, you have to recognize this in others too, and like say favorable words to them as well. Like, because he says, like, let us seize the favorable moment of our being together in order to say a good word to each other as well. So do you think like this also has something to do with like not just recognizing like the original gift in yourself, but also like in everyone else?
Yeah, I think that is true. The thing about the defense attorney, Feshikovich, is he's trying to prove Dimitri's innocence by basically saying, look, if he did do the murder, if he did do this, it was just for him to do it. It was perfectly like acceptable to do this. Although he says a lot of very fascinating, insightful things. This is what's so complicated about reading Dostoevsky, is there's no one that's like really, here's the good guy and here's the bad guy. It's kind of like, it's I think I maybe made reference to this, but it's there's this line from Solzhenitsyn about the line between good and evil cuts between the human heart, or cuts right within the human heart. And so Feshikovich says some things that are insightful, and he says some things in this chapter. It's called the adulterer of thought. He's basically trying to get innocence, but in this real kind of perverted, corrupted way, by almost saying, look, if there really is no higher justice, then it was just for Dimitri to do this, because just look at the man. Like, if you just look at him, it's a matter of like ethics, that he should be able to rebel against his father, because he proved himself not to be worthy of honor, and therefore it was just for Dimitri not to do that. At least that's sort of the connotation of the whole thing. To the main point, I think that's true, that you have to. What kind of gives dignity of other people is that you recognize what gives dignity to you, which is this very fact of your existence. And so the fact that someone is a little annoying, and the fact that they slur their speech, or they stutter or whatever, looking at them at that level will make them kind of hard to love. But if you can look at them and see them at a deeper level, you can see a goodness that like underlies a lot of what would be good reason to despise this person. Like if I look at a lot of my kids, I can come up with great reasons why I should ignore them. Yeah, Just spend a little time with the kids, and you'll get a good list of why you should ignore children. But that's only if you like focus at this kind of this lower level, we'll call it. And there's this other level at which you can see them, which that's kind of like if you look at the level of the injustice, you realize you don't want any part to do with God's world because it's perfectly unjust. But if you look at this higher order, that this is an opportunity to sort of demonstrate the love that the Son has for the Father, even when the Father almost say doesn't prove it. It's like the Father sends his Son to die an innocent death. You would expect that the Son would rebel against that. What father would want his Son to go die an innocent death? But it becomes this expression of a deeper love, so that what seems to be unjust on the Father's part gets made to be an act of love because of what the Son does in response to it. And so it's actually a pretty heavy Trinitarian type of conclusion.